Well, this is a first for the Smoking Hot Nerds. We've always talked about having a special guest on our show, and today is the very first time we'll have ever had a guest on our show, the one and the only Selena Lane. Actress, writer, director, all-around fantastic cocktail maker.
Thank you so much, especially for the last one, because that's where all my quarantine efforts are going.
Yes.
I'm so humbled and excited to be here, as they say, but now I know why they say it, because it's how I feel.
Yes, exactly. Right? They always say, everyone's always says it's an honor just to be nominated, but until you're nominated, you don't really know how true that is.
I know. I am so excited to be here. It's a cliche, and it's true.
Well, we're so excited to have you. You know, the show is obviously all male, and so it's exciting to have a different perspective, but also it's a show about movies and TV shows and kind of pop culture in general. And you're someone who contributes to the pop culture as a writer and director, and so it's exciting to have someone who's also in the trenches of Hollywood doing her thing.
Yeah, I'm an interesting kind of like movie person who had ended up in movies, because I'm so far from that person who grew up thinking, oh, I want to make movies. I was barely allowed to watch movies growing up. I think between like the ages of 2 and 20, I saw like 200 movies, like if I'm being real.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and then like by the time I kind of had my screen privileges, like, you know, more flexible as I got older, I really liked TV. So I still feel like I'm playing so much catch up with movies, which I think is a blessing and a curse, because it's obviously something I am working to do, and I have definitely seen a lot more movies in the past 5 years. But I think it's also really beneficial to kind of not have like so much in the back of my head of I want things to look like this, or I want to try and emulate this filmmaker or a director, because I think sometimes that can be to a detriment of not necessarily going with what I see something as, but more because I'm like, oh, I want to write something or direct something in this genre, and I'm pushing it towards an ideal that's outside of my own creative path. So I think it works in both ways to kind of have that background. I definitely ended up directing in a way that felt like by necessity. I was always a writer first. I was a performer first. And it just got to a point where with certain scripts, I just felt like, oh, I know how I see this. So like, why would I give this away? I never kind of really set out to be like, I want to be a director and I want to do this. But I think when I write certain things, it just feels so wholly like my own that it just doesn't make sense to pass it off.
Yeah. And story is story, right? So it's just whether you grew up watching movies or watching plays or performing in plays and reading stuff like that, a story is story and creativity is creativity, kind of regardless of where it comes from. Because a lot of can you walk us through a little bit of that, sort of where the creativity came from? Was it a lot of theater and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it's two-pronged. I did grow up doing theater, so as a director, I'm very much influenced by my background as an actor. Really think a lot about acting coaching when I'm on set, working with actors. I think a lot about that when I write, and that influences kind of the triangle between performance, writing, and directing. Dialogue is such a huge way that my stories are driven. So I think that that's something I'm really drawn to, is like, how do we get the visual to match what's going on in the dialogue and the in-betweens? I think that's always kind of like a driving force, and a lot of like the cinematography and choices come actually within the framing of the dialogue, which I think is, I don't want to say it's uncommon because maybe it's not, but I don't hear about that a lot.
Right.
I think a lot of people are thinking like frames and shots first, and kind of moving from that angle. And then another big thing is that I was a huge reader growing up. I was obsessive. It's still one of my favorite things to do, is to sit down with a good book. There's really nothing like it for me. I I was a vociferous reader as a child. So I think I also had a lot of experience looking at words and kind of creating these worlds in my mind, because that's, of course, what you do with a book. And it was always so strange to me to see a movie from a book that I had read, and I was like, this is so different.
Right.
And I think that I learned inadvertently, or practiced at least, a lot of world building from interpreting words on the page.
Yeah.
I think it always comes back to words on a page for me. That's like my great love of life, is I just think words on a page, and directing and just filmmaking all come out of that kind of core. So I think both reading plays that obviously had a more direct relationship to performance and to a visual aesthetic, and then the kind of just world of my mind with books and fiction and even nonfiction to an extent, poetry a little bit, really shaped how I like to tell stories and how I view them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think theater's like kind of the place where we all kind of start. I don't know if I like that, Nick. The background is fuzzed out. It's not working for me. You got like a halo around your head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But there, that's better. The theater thing is totally, I think, where it all kind of gets started for a lot of us. I mean, especially, that's primarily a lot of where your work still is, though, Eric, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's local theater, and then with Lumen Group. So, yep, still tied to theater for sure.
I love it too. I think plays, and I maybe more than 2 years ago at this point. I had the opportunity to direct these plays that I wrote. It was a short play series, and it was just directing those. It felt like I had to make no decision, because it just felt like every decision was written for me. And I had written those scripts, so obviously that had an effect. But I think I'm so comfortable in the theater space. It wasn't even it just felt like walking. It was like one foot in front of the other, and you don't have to think, now should I use my left foot or my right foot, or should I take a right at this corner to get home or not? It was just so natural, and it was so wonderful. And I think as a relatively new director to film, and that I've really only been doing it for about 3 years, I am excited and really kind of look forward to potentially getting to a space like that in film. Because I'm the first person to say that as a director, I have so much to learn. Like I said, it was not something that I began studying as a young child, or even watching YouTube videos of Martin Scorsese in high school. It was nothing like that. So I think that I'm eager to just soak up ways to learn and keep that kind of balance between what I have yet to accomplish and learn from, and then also kind of keeping those roots and what I bring to the table that might be unique.
Nothing makes you feel older than someone saying YouTube in high school in the same sentence. Thanks for that. When we were in high school, it required you to check it out from the library. You were allowed 5 minutes, and it took 4 minutes to boot up.
Yeah.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah.
I don't really know if YouTube was very popular when I was in high school. Maybe right at the brink.
It was. Somebody made me feel really old the other day because they said something about, I've loved Snapchat since I was in high school. They said something about Snapchat, and I was like, come on. Like, you've had Snapchat since high school, so that's an old person. That makes you feel old for sure. It's like we barely had the internet in high school, like just barely, and we were using it to download Encyclopedia Britannica. I think is what that was mostly like. It was just very very basic use of.
There was no such thing as a search engine. Like AOL existed.
Yeah, there was AOL.
Existed.
Yeah.
But that was it.
Yeah,
and even then, it was like, I remember they had it printed next to the computer. There was like a 17-step, like, oh, you're looking for books on this? Blah, blah, blah. There's this huge list of things you had to do. Open this, type this, launch this program, close that program. It was insane. And now it's like, boop, Chrome, done.
There it is.
Yeah, it's nutty. But yeah, no, thanks for that. Thanks for the trip down memory lane there. Appreciate it.
It was good.
Do you guys want to see my TikTok when I graduated from 8th grade?
Right. Yes. I have a TikTok. Do you guys have a TikTok yet?
No.
No? I mean, I don't
No one
put
wants
anything on it, but
this.
I technically do,
do you?
but it has like 4 videos on it. I used TikTok so I wanted to make a video to post someplace else. So I downloaded TikTok for the ease of the editing tools, because you can make that kind of video so easily on the platform. And I literally had a username that was like user 4968.
Right.
Like I just went out. And then but I technically posted it because that was the only way you could save it to your device, I think, or I don't know. I didn't look very much into it. And then I got like 600 views. And then I was like, oh, should I do this?
Yeah.
And so I got really flattered. And then all my videos were getting like 1,000 views. And then I did like 4 and then I stopped. So that's where I'm at with
Yeah, the organic reach is out of control. My first one was that it blew up, and then I was like,
is that how they grab you?
Yeah. It's because it's one of those sort of supply and demand things. There's so much demand and not that much supply. So everybody's videos are just popping up on the feed. You can follow people, but then there's a recommended version, and they just send you videos. So you could scroll through and come up with a video that's got 1 million views, and then the next one somebody who's got 80 views. So it's just that completely random. But that's how TikTok stars have been made so rapidly, which just boggles my mind that a person could theoretically, I guess it applies to all of the things, but especially TikTok, that people put so much of their self-worth into how popular they are on TikTok, and that
it's not even self-worth anymore. Like, it's actual worth
just
now.
worth.
Is it?
No, you're right.
It's net worth.
Is it monetized yet on TikTok?
It, in one way or another, it is. I don't know how they do it yet, but
yeah,
I haven't looked into it. But I'm assuming it's very similar to Vine, and Vine had, which is the reason that it collapsed, which is really funny, is that there's a 2 method you could get, because it was run by I think it was Twitter, right? So you had Twitter ad that they would pay people with rotation to promote a product, but there was nothing in the terms and conditions that said that they couldn't then also self find stuff to promote. So they were getting checks, they were getting Twitter ad checks, and then they were also getting like Nike ad checks or whatever. And then they said they were double dipping. So that's how these people became from zero to millionaires giving away Lamborghinis and shit. But then like once the ad revenue kicked, and then these other companies were trying to then cycle it back through the business, that's why it failed. Because then a lot of these kids were like, well, YouTube, they were just making the switch. They're like, well, I'm going to do 7 seconds, not 6 seconds. So like once the money started kicking for all these people, then it started to fall down. And then Twitter was just like, we don't want the legal hassle of somebody does something stupid with a product. Was it the promotion that we paid for, or was it the promotion that they went and got themselves?
Right.
Because that's why there's all the dumb stuff now with people saying, not a sponsor, which I've made that joke.
Right.
It's declaring that you're not a sponsor.
We're not sponsored.
It's not false, but yeah, I would imagine TikTok's the same way, that there may not be, because it's somebody's going to correct me on this, but this is what I believe. I think it started in China, and I think it was government funded. Like the guy who runs it had zero money and is now a billionaire, but I think it was government funded, and they were using it to populate their facial recognition software. Which is just like Snapchat
an
does.
Absurd, ridiculous, like conspiracy theory. That's probably true, and we'll find out through a Netflix documentary in 10 years. But for now, that sounds bonkers. No,
the parent company is definitely Chinese. I was actually just reading about this today. It's one of like the biggest. Yeah, very unrelated to all of this. But I was looking up unicorns, which are like startups that are valued at over $1 billion.
Not the horse.
I was just Google imaging.
Well, that's what we do on this show. We Google image a lot of things because I don't know what a lot of things look like.
And then we describe them via audio.
So let me check. Let me just look up unicorns real quick. Unicorns.
Are we getting off topic? Nah.
Yeah, no.
Is that a horse unicorn?
Yeah. Oh,
this is
gotcha.
about content creation.
Yes.
No, Matt, that's a triceratops.
Nope, that's an elephant. Keep going.
God, what if you went like your whole life just accidentally thinking that a triceratops was a unicorn?
Well, we've had this conversation because
it
started.
I just asked such important question.
It started with me not knowing what Well, you guys said, what did you say? A satyr? You were like,
Yeah, satyr.
something was a
We're
satyr.
talking about The Witcher.
Witcher.
Yeah.
We're talking about The Witcher.
I don't know what a satyr is. And they're like, well, it's a hoofed mythical creature. And I was like, yeah, like a minotaur. They're like, no, a minotaur is a cow. And I was like, no, a minotaur is a horse. And they're like, no, that's a centaur. And it just went off because I guess I don't know what the difference between a centaur and a minotaur
jackalope.
And a zebra is.
That's a half human, half jackalope.
Right. Oh
Human
man,
body.
I think we lost our guest. She's all frozen up. Oh, there she is.
Like Google image search.
Just like a
Yeah, she was searching for satyrs. Searching for triceratops.
Sorry, I just had to do some quick filter.
Oh, now
I had to be satiated.
So
what did I miss, guys?
We'll come back.
You
Slight
missed
topic.
nothing.
Yeah, you didn't miss anything at all. Trust me. One of the reasons for us wanting to also have you on the show was we had a conversation 2 or 3 shows ago, and it kind of evolved into us talking about women directors and sort of like the disparity within. Well, it was an Oscars talk, and so it was talking about why were no female directors nominated, and it quickly became very apparent that we don't know what the hell we're talking about. And so I thought, hey, this would be fantastic to have an actual female director on the show to actually offer some perspective on that. Because initially the conversation was actually we had talked about Greta Gerwig and about Little Women not being nominated for Best Picture, but she was nominated for Best Director, right?
No, it was nominated for Best Picture.
No, other way around.
Other way around? It was nominated for
yeah.
Best Picture, and she wasn't nominated for Best Director? Wow,
That's
it
correct.
should have been the other way around, because I decided I didn't want to be an uninformed a-hole, and I watched Little Women today.
Wow.
Yeah, didn't care for it much, but she is obviously has such an eye and such a creative direction. Didn't think the movie was awesome, but I was just like, she is such a great director. But anyways, we thought it would be like a great thing to have somebody on who has that perspective, because you've been in Hollywood enough to know, to see it, right? To see how the game is played and how people are perceived differently just depending upon, race, gender, all those sorts of things. So, and some of the perspective. But what did you have an opinion about that? About this year's Oscars, about her not being nominated and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm by no means like some expert that studied that, like you said, I only have my experiences. So it's not, I never claim, I would never want to claim that I, know something that I don't. But I think, yeah, it's interesting because I've not only worked on my own things, I also previously worked for a female director. I also, before that, worked for a director of color, Asian American. And I think it's been interesting, not just with my own experiences, but seeing that as well. I don't think that there's one answer as to why this is the case or what can be done to solve it. Obviously, if it was so simple, it would be simpler.
Yeah.
Oh no, did I freeze again?
You froze, but we can hear you.
I can see it just fine. What part of the other discussion too is that we weren't sure. Now she's gone.
Oh, all frozen. That's okay.
I got everybody but her. She's getting a spike. We'll wait.
Yeah, we can wait. What are you drinking there, Eric?
My trashy mix of whiskey and
Dr. Pepper.
Arizona green tea.
Oh. That is trashy. You
It's so trashy.
Get yourself a can of Colt 45 to go with
We
it.
call that one the Boston Harbor.
Do you like it? Or is it just times are tough? What's the...
Oh no, it's just what I like.
Yeah. No, I would rather you say that's because it's what I like rather than
yeah.
Depression
No.
was.
I mean, you could call it that for sure.
Yeah.
But
I like to call this one the Back Bay.
got this from the Charles, bro.
I've definitely
Straight out of Charles.
at times tried to I've had you've had those emergency drinks, where it's just all I've got is vodka and Dr. Pepper. That's what I'm having tonight, that kind of thing. Yeah. Hey, there you are.
Hey, I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. We were
It's
just
just more work for Matt.
yeah.
He's got to edit it all
Right.
in.
Sorry.
I don't edit anymore.
We'll talk about my mixology.
Yeah. Well, so
Oh,
before we get too serious, which we were about to there, let's talk a little bit about the difference between mixological things happening on the show right now. We've got the Bean Bar, the.bean.bar
yeah.
on Instagram. Over here
Oh, God.
mixing
Did I
up.
just freeze again? What is going on with our internet?
I don't know. It looks so beautiful in Los Angeles.
Yeah, you're
Very nice.
moving. I can
Oh,
see
it's
you.
still sunny. Oh,
Yeah, I
it's
know.
dreary here.
It's not
nice.
Zoom. We're on Skype.
You're fine on my end. Oh, and there she goes.
We got like 12 inches of snow today in Colorado.
Shut up, really?
Would you get that much?
Oh yeah, it's disgusting out there.
You got a foot of snow?
Got a foot of snow.
You got a wicked footer?
Wicked footer. There it is.
You like that? Just smashing these worlds together.
Yeah. Well, I guess we didn't even talk about that. Sorry
Go
for
down to
everyone who's
Buffalo,
listening
Rob?
to the show. This is all over the place. But Eric's in Boston right now. That's where Eric lives. Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
from
Right around the
shit.
corner.
I'm in Cambridge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My second home growing up. Give everyone your address so I can know where you are exactly.
Mhm.
I'm joking.
Say it on the show.
Down the street from
No,
Lord
are you serious?
What?
I love that it locks up on her end before it locks up on my end, so I
Yeah.
get to watch her like panic, like oh, what's going on?
And it's like fine over here. Weirdly enough.
Oh,
But,
God.
Yeah.
You see what I'm talking about? Is it like,
Yeah. Yeah. Don't stress out. Selena, don't stress.
Are you back?
And my drink is empty. That's fine.
Well,
It's just as annoying.
have Eric make you a whiskey and Arizona green tea.
That's what I'm drinking.
You can see my bar back there. I'm very close. I can just take a swig of something if I
Well,
need to.
feel
with
free
very
if
little
you wanted to
effort.
make a cocktail on the show. You're more than welcome.
Oh,
self-love.
I'll add sound effects.
Yeah. Right.
Do not tempt me.
But you were saying,
Big
Eric.
salt sound.
Yeah. Not those sound effects. Eric lives by Lord Hobo.
I don't know that you
Do you know that bar?
Do you? Because
I
it's
think so.
relatively newish. But yeah, maybe not. It's been around
Or
for
maybe
a decade.
something else that's new. Okay, decade. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
I'm-
doctor was in Harvard Square, and my dad worked in that area, so I feel like I was always over there.
mhm. I'm kind of by Inman, between Inman and Kendall.
My mother used to work at Riles Jazz Club,
Oh, yeah.
which R.I.P. Very
Great,
sad.
great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, just to take even more of a tangent, I just want to get as far away from the
That's-
questions I'm going to ask as possible. No, I'm joking.
Right. Yeah. This is how it usually works. We start with a topic and then it just goes
Derails.
off the rails.
So with you here, we should do a shot for around the world, and we all take a shot.
A shot for what?
Good nice.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
just
little coast to coaster.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I'll do a shot of lemon LaCroix.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Yeah, it's delicious. I've returned back to the basic flavors. I returned back to lemon,
The
lime.
core.
Yeah, I'm just enjoying those more. Sometimes I'll toss in a passion fruit, but usually
Pamplemousse.
it's just lemon and lime nowadays, which works nicely. So
My favorite, passion fruit and mango. It's all right. We can move on.
passion fruit. This video.
Well, I hopped on that LaCroix flavor train right when it was shunned down for the night.
This episode not sponsored by LaCroix.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I don't
well,
know. I think if you bring it up 3 times consecutively, they have to pay you, right? So
maybe.
this is like the 3rd time now.
Actually,
So
yeah.
I'll be waiting for that check.
We do talk about it a lot.
Unofficially sponsored.
What we haven't talked about is what are you wearing, Eric?
Whoa!
What is on your neck?
So this was the fashion I started developing at work. I was like, I want to dress nice, but I'm a weirdo. So it slowly evolved from like vest to 3-piece to weird bolos added on top.
So you
I like
wearing
it.
a bolo? Oh, you're wearing a jacket. It's hard to see because it's kind of dark on my.
It's all black. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I go 3-piece. Yeah.
3-piece with a bolo.
And then like weird abstract bolos.
So it's like. So like kind of that. Then like it's like a kind of Western style.
Because I said, what do I never see around here?
Bolos.
That's what it is. Deal with it, everybody.
Like Yankees fans and bolos. I'll go with bolos.
Yeah. So I'm somewhere in between like Texas tycoon, oil tycoon, and dad of a kid in Slytherin.
Well, there was a senator, I think, in Colorado who always wore bolo ties.
Campbell?
That's the guy. Ben Nighthorse Campbell. Yep. And he always wore bolo ties, so it could become your trademark. This is phenomenal. How exciting.
Eric Sleepy Pants.
I think his was more rooted in years and years of cultural history, but that's fine.
We'll call you
Eric. I'm appropriating it. I'm doing what white people do.
I'm doing what the white people do best. I'm going to appropriate your culture and make it terrible. You're welcome. Watch me dab, everyone.
No, I don't wear like big eagles or things like that.
Well, you look great.
I wear like
I like it. I think you look amazing.
Yeah, I agree also.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's roll with it. So back to Oscars, etc.
Back to actual topics. Sorry, everyone.
Now that I've actually watched some of these movies,
yeah, I know.
I can begin to talk about the Oscars from last year.
Well, so I was going to ask the super serious question. I was going to ask though, because this is what started the debate, was that when we talked about you watch Best Picture and you see the nominees, you can tell that the total construction of a movie is good versus the total construction of a movie that's really horrible. Like that's a visual straight up. Best actor, best actress, supporting, those are individual performances that are geared work that you can observe. Cinematography, sound editing, costume design, production design, those are all physical, tangible things that you can see. Mm-hmm. But we talked about how the director position in particular, there's no checklist that makes you best director. So we were struggling with what is the criteria that you would say if you were given the opportunity to watch a bunch of films and then nominate directors, like what is the criteria that you would use to say like this is best director?
That's an excellent question.
Got her. Boom.
Did we all freeze up again? Looks like it.
Yeah, I got it.
Text.
I just dropped.
Let's do the time warp again.
I dropped so much knowledge on that right now. Just choked up the internet.
That's right. You broke the web, bro.
I broke the internet.
It was that bolo tie broke the internet.
It's true.
It took a minute to catch up. Yeah.
So this is a thing that you started doing. Like you really wanted to become. This is your fashion statement for work.
Yes.
Or at Target.
No, I can't at Target.
No, I know.
I have to wear a stupid red shirt. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean a lovely red top and blue or khaki bottoms. Stay on brand.
Kool-Aid, man. Drink that Kool-Aid until the checks come in.
That's right. Checks coming in tomorrow. Yeah. I don't know. I think I for a while had wanted to dress uniquely and well. Mm-hmm. And so, back last fall, I just started.
Just doing it. I like it.
Mm-hmm. And then eventually landed here.
Yeah, that's working.
I apologize for this too. Sorry.
So, Selena, sorry about that. It looks like we lost you again.
Yeah, these are tough times.
Yeah, they are. They really are tough times.
She's very busy, folks. We really do minutes at a time.
God, sorry, I had to jump off there for some calls. No, I think I heard most of your question, which was what is the criteria that kind of defines a success as a director versus a different role. I think like that's, I was thinking about this as I was desperately refreshing my internet, hoping it would give me a few moments to think about my answer. And my initial impulse was to say that, a director is really responsible for what I ultimately feel like is I'm now repeating words, what I think of as the feel of the movie, right? So the pacing, the overall kind of energy that's coming from behind all of the elements that we see delineated in those other categories. So the kind of energy that's pulsing from the acting, the cinematography, the sound design, all those things, that unifying kind of ability for the movie to become a movie versus being like, wow, that's a shot that's looking at this. Like, we don't think like, hey, this shot is capturing this and this person's thinking this while this music plays. No, we just think of watching a movie, and ideally we're just in the movie and transported into that world. So I think that the director is really responsible and should take the credit and blame for what that ultimately is, because it's not just that the director would be making those choices, it's also that the director is there may be a better word for this that I'm going to come up on later, but kind of approving the choices brought to them, right? So, of course, any good collaboration is not going to be like, you just do exactly this, and a cinematographer just completely follows that. Obviously, a cinematographer, an actor, all the other designers are coming with their own influences and ideas, but ultimately it's the director that's saying either no or no but or yes and or whatever series of conjunctions you want to use. So I think that there's like a certain level where the director can just kind of take ownership of that. I say ownership with an asterisk because I think that obviously credit is, or sometimes blame should be, given accordingly. But so that's what my initial answer is, and I still stand by that. But then I think the question is, what is the difference between Best Director and Best Picture? So, because I think everything that I just said could also apply to Best Picture, right? If the director is responsible for the sort of overall effect of the film, well, isn't the effect of the film the picture? And that's obviously what Best Picture is. I think here at this point in my answer, I probably want to differentiate between what is a good director and a really good film and what is the Oscars, which is, more than just a sort of objective look at, or even a subjective look at, well, obviously subjective, it's more than just a subjective look at films, because there's so much that goes into what gets an Oscar nomination. There's obviously, for better or for worse, and I'm not, we can get into whether this is good or bad or how it should work or what's wrong about it, all those things, but having the finances, having the viewership, right, it's not just necessarily about I have a lot of money that I'm throwing at a campaign, but if somebody has a great film that just literally isn't seen, well, of course it's not going to have the eyes on it. So I think that Oscars is a partial, I think it's a good but still partial reflection of audience and movie-going society. So I think that these questions are all really valid. I think everything that I just said definitely applies to the idea of what makes a good director, what makes a good movie. And I don't totally have an answer right now about what is that difference, because we think of it so differently because there are two categories in this award show. But I don't know what the difference is. I mean, it doesn't, I think that's always the thing. It doesn't make a lot of sense that someone could be nominated in one category and not the other. Right. And then at the same time, you're well, of course, because if they were always, then there would be one category. So it's which came first, the two categories or the setup that we always have to have two categories? I don't know. So I guess my answer, I can kind of speak on behalf of the hypothetical, what Oscars sort of should mean in that they're supposed to reflect the best movies of the year. And then my answer, I think, kind of comes to a little bit of a halt when I'm looking at what the Oscars actually are. Which is something hard. Yeah.
Do you think that the Best Director category in particular is more of a collection of work category than just the sampling of the one single year? Example of just I don't want to say you see the same people every year nominated for Best Director, but I mean, we talked about in an earlier show how Scorsese put out a movie that was just total horse crap. And
Wait, what?
But he was nominated. It was the
Oh,
the Liam Neeson movie.
That one.
It's the Liam Neeson one. Yeah.
I thought you were talking about The Irishman. I was like, hang on a minute.
No.
Taken 7.
That's
you were talking about the Joker. That's what you meant to say.
Yes. Yeah. So he produced this Blender train wreck 2-3 years ago, and wasn't nominated. And then he put out The Irishman this year, and I don't remember if he was nominated for Best Director or not for Irishman this year. But so. Would it be a fair statement to conjecture that that category in particular carries a lot of what your accumulation of works have done to be nominated for Best Director, because it's such a behind-the-scenes thing versus some other categories?
I think my answer is a little bit adjacent to maybe the answer you're looking for.
There's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just kind of prefacing, but I think if you think about how many actors are household names, right? You could if that was like a category or a rapid fire or something, you could list anyone really, whether they watched movies or not, could really list quite a few. If you think about either yourself as filmmakers, as whatever you want to call yourself, maybe even connoisseurs, blah blah blah, podcasters, the list of directors that you can name as really household names is so much shorter.
Yeah.
So I think that there is an element of both conscious and subconscious familiarity when being gravitated towards just names of anything, right? And I think that that's where that's a huge part of, I think, the gender divide is there's this sort of sense of, the actors is such a good analogy, because we all know that people want a big actor for the star power of it, right? You can put their name on the billboard and people are like, hey, I know who Leonardo DiCaprio is, or I know who Jennifer Lawrence is, and sure, that movie maybe looks good or not, but I'm going to go see that movie. And with a director, that power is just, exponential compared to actors, because there's so few that are names, and those names that are male. So it's not about someone being like, I don't want to see a female director. I don't want to hire a female. I mean, I'm sure there are.
It exists.
That's something that happens.
It's so much more complex than that. And it's not, I've never felt, when thinking about these, these gender gaps or things like that, it's not very useful for me to think about it that way, because most people are smart and thoughtful, and most people aren't in the world, or I like to say, I know that I'm talking about who I see as the majority of people, which aren't thinking, hey, I want to stay in the past. I don't want to support, women directors or people of color or women of color or anything. It's just more that we have so much experience in what we've seen, what we've viewed, both in award shows or just in the theater or on our TV screens, that we've been told not just male names, but I think another really big part is not just that we know Martin Scorsese or
you can't even think of a man's name. How dare you?
What really happened is my brain just wanted to say Aaron Sorkin so badly, and Aaron Sorkin's not. But it was I have those moments.
He's directed.
That's true. Yeah. Aaron Sorkin, his name is exploding in my mind for whatever reason. I acknowledge that out of the way.
It's your writer brain.
But
I just want to say,
and this comes specifically, I think, back to Little Women, is that I think we also, as viewers and Hollywood as buyers and investors, have a really long way to go in valuing female, not female driven, actually, that's actually not what I'm saying, female perspective stories.
Sure.
And Little Women was, it was written and directed with a really strong female perspective.
Yes.
And I think that and this is where I think I do experience this a lot, and by no means am I saying that the things that I've written or done don't need vast amount of work done to them to, move forward in some way. But I think that I have definitely found that things that have stories that I've worked on, or looking outside of myself, films that really come from a female perspective, are not valued. They're not seen as marketable. they're not seen as legitimate as a male-oriented story, which is what is really the status quo. That's what we're really kind of used to. I worked on I was in a fellowship this past fall, and I worked on this project called Salt, which is an anthology series about couples who meet through an app that matches people based off a mutual sexual fantasy. Mm-hmm. And when you hear that log line, you think very like kind of dark and sexy and edgy. But my writing voice is, I think, extremely what a lot of people would think of as feminine, in that like I'm really interested in the relationships. I've already mentioned like highly dialogue driven, and I like a kind of good layer of comedy in there. And I think that it was really interesting to hear some people's, especially before I developed it with the fellowship, some people's feedback on it, because it felt like what they were really saying is like, we want the kind of male version of this that's like really kind of pushing like the sex and the manipulation, or winning or losing, like that kind of thing. And of course, like you need punchy things in a story. Again, I'm not saying that like the things that I had at the time were perfect and the people who were saying that were wrong, but I did really notice that, where it was sort of like, what needs to be worked on, like what needs to be developed in this, and what is just not living up to the perception of what this show should be, because the log line feels really kind of punchy and sexy from a, and I'm obviously, when I say female perspective and male perspective, I'm always like hugely generalizing. Right. So I'm super aware of that. Really. Yes. But I think that those are two really big factors. It's just like pure familiarity. If you Google best directors or like top directors or biggest directors, like take away the superlative of best, it's all white men. It's all white men in there for like 45 to 60. Probably Taika Waititi is on there kind of like now on the second page of Google. At least we've got a little bit of diversity, but it's just so much recognition, and then also kind of, I think, valuing the type of story, because we've seen that when stories are given the same sort of platform and respect feels like such a hard word in this case, but the same sort of resource, let's just bundle it up as resources, and I mean that in a very, very broad way, not just monetarily. These female perspectives, let me cut back to that. These female perspective films do just as well. I mean, Bridesmaids, by like runaway hit. So I'm not just sort of talking about like, I'm not referring to, and I think that the fact that we often go to this in our minds says a lot. I'm not just referring to like romantics and romantic comedies and kind of these like soft things, but because it can be true in absolutely any genre. I mean, Fleabag, right, is hugely from the perspective of a woman, and that is, it's raunchy, it's sharp, it's
Sex and the City is probably like the best example of something, and it was like primarily written by a man, but her now I'm blanking on her name, not Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Jessica Parker was an EP on the show, I think after maybe the second season, and so she was like really influential on it. But the Carrie Bradshaw perspective, and just all the girls really in the show, I mean, that was like a huge turning point for saying, yes, this is from the female perspective, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be devoid of flashy stuff and sex and raunchy humor and all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. Like it actually had the things that still captivate interest. And I think what's interesting too is, so Little Women was, I'm not familiar with the story. I think it's a lot like Pride and Prejudice. It's a lot like Emma. It's a lot like all those types of when you kind of grow up with the book and you grow up with the story. And I thought about you and your sisters when I was watching the movie, because that's who would get these characters, is other girls who were in a family of other girls. But the thing is that the main character, Saoirse Ronan's character, I identified with her character greatly, because she is a writer, doesn't really like value, she doesn't want to be married and have kids and all this kind of stuff. She values her career and her artistic pursuits. Like, and I got that. Like, I totally understood that. But that was my whole thing when I was watching it. I was going, this is so from a particular female perspective from a particular time period. It's so romantic and so classical that that one just had a rougher time probably getting to the masses than other types of things like Bridesmaids or Sex and the City or whatever else. So that's maybe where that one kind of got lost in the mix a little bit.
I think it was because, like we talked about before, that this is what, like the 9th Little Women in the last like 10 years. So I think it was just like I hate to, this does sound terrible, but it's like story burnout that you couldn't come up with something, so you just remade Little Women.
Well, but the Avengers did fine. I mean, they did like 10 years of Marvel movies, and that never burned out for some reason.
No, but I think
which I think primarily because it is so testosterone-y, and so, which I have my own opinions about all that crap. I can't stand the Marvel movies to a certain extent because they're so grotesquely violent and over the top, and it's just like, it's not, I don't think that they're art by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the Avengers movies are so, but yeah.
No, I mean, I'm just curious though, that like, because you mentioned Fleabag, which I think is great, and one of the questions I was going to ask you was, can you put you on the spot? I'll let you think about it. Can you rattle off your 5 best examples of works from a female perspective that we may or may not be aware of, but just ones that you would definitively declare, like, this is not the male perspective of a female story, but this is female voice forward. So I'll let you mull that over. But my concern with the Little Women one that we talked about too is that I think the reason it didn't hit such a broad audience is because there was the one with Winona Ryder like 6 years ago. Like, it just feels like I don't know if this is what it is, but if it feels like they're dipping back into a known well to try to say, like, all right, we have to roll something back in again.
Well, my initial one of the things that, and I don't know if I stand by this, because I said it was like 2 episodes ago, I had said, that there may have been a reason, like, so Lady Bird was a really great movie.
Yep.
But then the follow-up to this really super indie darling is a remake of Little Women. That's like a rough transition to say, take me seriously. I think that any sort of follow-up that could potentially be, but here's the other thing. I'll be very clear about this. I could tell watching Little Women that there was a tremendous amount of studio influence and a tremendous amount of influence probably by the fact that it had a bunch of money and had a bunch of stars in it now. Yeah, the soundtrack was so rom-com and so like just certain things that I was just like, like you can tell that it didn't have the artist's fingerprint on it like it should. Sure. I think it's
its own version of a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it kind of just had like a sort of a mass appeal. But what was also interesting, I'm talking too much, but I'm going to keep going.
You're fine.
Is what I also found interesting was that the main character, that's her whole entire plight throughout the whole movie, is she's a writer. No one understands her, and it's driven by a man's world where all they're doing is saying, make it flashier, make it fancier, make sure the girl dies at the end. Like, it's just very like exactly what we deal with now. But this was in right after the Civil War, so it's like very, very interesting that was, I think, what we're dealing with now in terms of sort of like the inequalities is something that's always been dealt with, but you're seeing it even for artists, 150 years ago.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I would say that, and I'm totally biased on that film because it did echo so many things that are personal for me. Like, that's like where I grew up, and the sisters and the female writer in front of and behind the camera. So I can't even really speak on the movie objectively because I know I'm so biased about it. But the one thing that I would say I didn't like about it was that it did feel like sometimes those kind of messages felt like heavy-handed, which like is interesting. Like, maybe for me, just being so familiar with those things, it was like, well, you don't need to say that. It's very obvious what's happening in the scene. So that's interesting because it's like, well, probably for a lot of the audience, it did need to be said. But I can also answer that question about personally, like movies and TV shows, just works that I've really responded to. I'm going to double dip on Phoebe Waller-Bridge in both Fleabag and Killing Eve. I do prefer Fleabag just in a general, it's that genre. I just think that's such a brilliant show. But I really enjoyed Killing Eve as well. I loved The Farewell, Lulu Wang. What was the other one I was just about to say?
Fast and Furious 9.
Fast and Furious.
Definitely.
Totally female voice right there.
Kay Cannon, I love. I can't wait for her she's a female director that I can't wait for her kind of breakout. She did this show that got canceled right away. It was about the Nasty Gal founder on Netflix. It got no attention and kind of crashed and burned, but I really turned out to her as a director from that show. And she's becoming a bit more well-known. But there was, what was the one this does not sound good, that I can't. I have it's the same thing where Aaron Sorkin was in my, but I have it already to go.
The newsroom.
And then I got distracted listening to the Little Women conversation.
Well, but you brought up something interesting though too, where, and I want to hear your perspective, because it is not objective. Because the thing is that the three of us are going to have extremely non-objective opinions because of our experience and our gender, and because of all the things that we've dealt with in our lives, and you're going to have yours. But that's the thing that's interesting about a movie and a story like Little Women, is it takes place near and dear in a place where you grew up, and you have two sisters, and so it's just there's so many things that go on in that make, I used to watch. Someone I was in a relationship was obsessed with Pride and Prejudice. Not obsessed with, I shouldn't say it like that, but loved the old one. What's his name? Colin Firth. So it was on most of the time when I got home, and I was just but I got really into it, and I was and I got to know these characters and these people as, you just get familiar with the world, and it just becomes part of you, and you start to really like it. It doesn't seem like it would be something that I would gravitate towards, but it's a great story, and really fun to watch. But anyways, your own personal experience is going to inform the things that you really love, right? So that's why inexplicably I like incredibly sad, horrible, human stories for some reason, and my life is pretty damn good. So I don't know where that comes from, but I think you just gravitate towards things that make you, that transport you into a headspace that you don't mind being in, I guess.
Yeah, I think also, when there's a multitude of media that's outside of your experiences, and you grow up with that, you learn, you don't have to relate to things in such a direct way to enjoy it. And I think that can be a big difference when for some people, when watching something that might feel more feminine, just because it's not something they're used to. Whereas when I feel I watch something that's got a very, when I say masculine, I really mean more traditional. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, something weird. Something weird just happened. Sorry. So I think that there can sometimes be an adjustment, whereas people who, I never saw female directors growing up. I didn't see, I think I think the biggest comparison for me growing up was the idea of the difference between the way that books that were considered chick lit, quote unquote, which was very broad, basically anything that was written by a female that wasn't deadly serious was kind of swooped up into chick lit. And I was always why is this diminutive category of literature or books, when something like sci-fi, that's not called boys books, that's not put in that way. And I think that can be translated to film a lot too, where I think we do kind of tend to and we see this a lot with romantic comedies, which romantic comedy, right, is just what? It's just a comedy that has that's a love story, that can just be put into this sort of lower category and associated with a female audience, female filmmaker, and Nancy Meyer, we just put in a different category. Why? Because it's different, yeah, but there's lots of different genres, and I think that there's just a really long way to go with kind of viewing these different approaches and different genres with equal, not only equal respect, but I think even equal interest. Or equal admitted interest, because I think there is a lot of interest. Like my boyfriend just like loves rom-coms. He just has like no problem being like, let's watch a rom-com, and it's like, why, you know, you just laughed, Matt, which makes perfect sense. Like that's a common response, but like, why is that?
Yeah.
I'm not saying this in a common way.
The reason that I laughed. Yeah. No, honestly, the reason that I laughed is because I you know, in the pantheon of movies that I love, two that are arguably in the top 10 are Devil Wears Prada and Love Actually, and it's just like, I think rom-coms are something that just feel familiar and comfortable, and so I was laughing because I was like, oh my god, me too. I have that moment with was it, I forget, I think it's no, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, no, I Love You Man, where Paul Rudd's talking to Jason Segel, and Jason Segel's like, what, you want to sit at home, watch Devil Wears Prada? And he's like, and Paul Rudd goes, oh god, I love that movie. And that's totally exactly how I feel about it. It's an amazing film. I mean, Anne Hathaway, you know, okay, yes, please. Emily Blunt, yeah, definitely. And you know, the queen of all actresses is just the best. So it's amazing. We lost Selena again. But anything with Meryl Streep, I'm in. So
anything with the Streep.
Yep.
Streep it up.
Yeah. Oh, gotta get her.
Well, too, I think something while we're waiting for her.
Yeah.
You know, I think this thought of like, well, if it's a woman's voice, how can mainstream, you know, how acceptable is that for the mainstream? It's like, what man on earth doesn't have a woman in his life? Doesn't hear women talk.
The whole population is female.
Yeah. So, you know, it's like, yeah, if you see some, like, I haven't seen Lady Bird, but when I've seen clips, I go, oh, this seems like it'd be an incredibly entertaining movie.
Yeah. I think
a mom and a daughter going at it, bickering with each other.
Right.
That sounds wonderful.
When we watch,
as long as I don't have to live it, then great.
Yeah, Andrew and I will watch those, and there's certain things that that don't necessarily speak to me, which they shouldn't, because I'm a dude and that's not but like a mother and daughter interaction, especially like Lady Bird, with that like fighting loving type thing. I don't know what that is. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean anything to me. So hold on. She's a very small picture. There you are.
I'm here.
So it's things like Killing Eve, which we're watching, that there are interactions between the two main characters that you can definitely tell are not a male voice. I'll just put it that way. That you could say, like, if it was a male assassin and a male agent hunting each other down, they would not be like fighting each other just so they could have dinner together. You know, that's like a really kooky example, but there are certain interactions or certain things that they do that are not of our genre, and so it's interesting because I want to get more open to that kind of stuff, but I don't want to get to the point where I'm just pinpointing the voice or trying to find like, oh, this is definitely a female influence, because then it taints, for me, it taints the whole experience, because then it's what I don't do a lot of times before when I see a movie and stuff is I don't do a lot of the background research on cinematographer, sound editor, director. I mean, unless obviously you know who they are, but I don't do any of that legwork in advance, just so that it doesn't preemptively taint the work. But then, like, when the credits roll and I see who's involved in the credits, and I'm like, oh, geez. So there's been a lot of stuff that I found that way, where the credits pop and you're like, oh man, that's amazing. I need to go back to this. Or even like when, I'm trying to think what the movie was. It was not, I mean, I'm an M. Night fan, but the whole movie was not like trailer, teasers, movie posters said nothing about M. Night Shyamalan. And then at the end of it, the credits roll, it's like directed by M. Night Shyamalan. I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. But that's the kind of thing that's a surprise I like, when you see something where it comes off and written and directed by like Phoebe. I'm gonna screw up her name, Waller-Bridge. I'll just say it really fast so you can't hear it.
No, but I think everything you're saying, it's not about like watching something and being like, I'm picking out who the judge. Like, of course, I think it's the same thing of I heard this once about lighting design in theater. It was like, if you're noticing the lighting design, they didn't do a good job. It's like, of course, with any experience of storytelling, you shouldn't be, unless you're like in the field and you're studying it for some reason, it's like you don't want to be thinking about anything. You don't want to be like, was this director, this jet, right? Like, that's all not something that you should be thinking about. I think what I feel is that like so much of it, right, just has to do with the sort of like social, like the overall kind of like culture approach to it. It's not like the onus is on you as an individual to be like, now I'm gonna like only watch things, like the gender of the, like, first AD, of course not. I think that's why it's so difficult and why it sometimes feels so overwhelming and frustrating, because the work is so, like, of an epoch, like it's so social and like that's so hard to make moves on, right? Like it sometimes feels like you're just kind of like chipping away with like a butter knife at this, at like a boulder, because how do you do that, right? It would be easy enough if I could just sort of like tell you like, hey, watch this movie and like you might find that you really like it because it's actually like X, Y, and Z. Like that's it, and maybe you like it and maybe you don't, but like there's a lot of actionable work to be done like between two people. How do you approach a movie-going audience that's been raised for the past X many decades to like think differently? And by the way, like the fact that I am a woman or like a female director does not mean that I'm like immune to these things. Like I'm constantly, especially as a writer, I'm constantly finding my own ways that I fall trapped to writing gender stereotypes or writing character, not having to do with gender, being like, you know what, I'm writing this character and I'm imagining them as white, like off the bat. Like it's constant work. It's not like, oh, you step into the other side of like, you've made a realization and you're like now in the clear. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that I've realized, and this is sort of like sociologically and generally, but like even in my own field with my own experiences, like being the minority, I still personally fall prey to those same things. So like if it's hard for me still, like it's got to be so hard for others. So I think that just the best thing is not thinking like, okay, how can we solve this tomorrow? Because that's just completely unrealistic. But it's like just having these conversations to like start to kind of like pry open the brain. And again, I don't mean like because I know all, like you need to pry open the brain. It's like vice versa. Like these conversations help me too. And when I talk about it, I think of like ways that I can push further into something I've already been thinking about, or like a way that I falling prey to a cliche or a stereotype, like without realizing it. So like that's like why this kind of thing is so great. You guys have like a million listeners, right?
Yeah.
I heard.
Somewhere around there. We lost track of it.
The other thing, and this is just going back to, and super apologies, I did not hear the very beginning of what you were saying. So if I'm totally taking this out of context, just
no, please take it out of context.
But you were saying like not relating. You were saying about not relating to Little Women, and I think like that kind of reminded me of what I was saying earlier, which is that like I don't relate to anything in like The Irishman, right? Like that's like not something like ooh, that's like my
back when you were painting houses. Yeah.
There are many, 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 many movies. And so it's not about like I should relate to that or you should relate to that. And it's not about I should like that and you should like that. Because like you don't like it, that's the beginning and the end of it. And you don't like it. And maybe you'll watch it in 10 years and you'll like it and maybe not. Like that's not the point. But I
what's
think
interesting though is that we do that to ourselves and to each other, where somehow the system still exists for a person in Hollywood to say, well, I don't relate to Little Women, neither will millions of men, we shouldn't make this movie, or you should make it more relatable. There is just a systemic problem that we have. And what sucks is that I can feel it, and I like, as enlightened as a human as I designed to be, and as I already fancy myself being, I still find myself noticing my own inconsistencies and my own sort of discrepancies when I watch movies. Watching the brand new Star Wars films, I can see the massive emphasis placed upon diversity, and it bothers me on this disgusting level that really makes me feel like a gross human, because but the thing is, sorry, I don't want to keep on steamrolling, but it tagged into what you were saying, Selena, earlier, was because movies and storytelling have been so dominated by tropes that we believe to be just sort of, we revere, like the maybe, let's say, angry British male is always the bad guy. So when I'm watching Solo and the person who's the gatekeeper in the scene is a skinny white woman, I'm just not nearly as intimidated by it, and I think it's a failure of a scene. But that comes from whatever I've been told and informed, and probably my own DNA a little bit, that just has sort of predisposed to have genetic, I guess, I don't know, abnormalities. I don't know what the word would be. So what were you saying, Eric?
Oh, well, what I was going to say is, like with Star Wars, I think that's a good example where there's a striving to say, hey, we want to add diversity. You go, great. But then they plug diverse actors into roles that are maybe crappy. Right. And so it does a disservice more than a service, because now all of a sudden, like Rose from Last Jedi is like this example where, could this person exist? Of course this person exists. But it's like, that character got vitriol. Is it because of the actress? Well, what's the reasoning for these things? Where it's like Lando Calrissian, everyone loved him. He was, he added diversity to the old trilogy,
in a '70s movie.
But he was written 80s. Well and correctly. Where I think when someone maybe doesn't know what they're doing and they just shoehorn in diversity and say, hey, look, we checked the box, which I think Disney's very good at. These big studios are going, well, we're checking boxes. That's all we're doing. And diversity is one of them. And gender representation is one of them. So they do this, but then they don't do it well. It backfires. And then if anything, it probably pushes things back. Where when you have something that's maybe written from someone with a different perspective, and there's a director and there's an actor and everyone's in tune and it works and it clicks, then you watch it and you go, oh man, this feels so unique and fresh and wonderful. Wow. Or you like, oh my goodness, this was so different than the usual crap I see all the time.
Well, it's kind of interesting that I felt one of the reasons why Little Women was so, this is somewhat related, was so weird to me the first maybe 25, 30 minutes, was because I'm not familiar with the story. And even though I should have taken it, like the first scene is like, she's outside of a door that says New York on it. So it should have gone into my brain that they're in New York. But the thing is that it's Pride and Prejudice-y sort of like world. I already had those preconceived notions in my head. And then you had like three British actresses and one Australian actress all doing American accents. I was completely confused what time period, what country we were in. I had no idea why Emma Watson didn't have a British. I was just like completely confused. And it was just, so I was once again mad at my own like preconceived notions of what things are. And sort of like I walked in with this idea already based upon my own prejudices, which was just kind of like, was very disappointing. And so that's where I was going with it before, was that none of us are immune, but we all do have whatever it was that we believe, grew up with, used to believe, whatever it is, still informs our decisions.
So I wanted to ask a question. I'm going to try to be careful about it. But so we've been talking about how, specifically this year with Little Women, and how Greta Gerwig was not nominated. I'm curious. I'm going to try to phrase this. I'm still working it through in my head. But what I'm curious about is, like, is the focus on? Has it become more of a focus on the women that aren't getting nominated as they're presenting movies of their voice? But I'm curious if that's like a slippery slope that we're going down, that only women who produce or who create works in the women's voice are now going to be seriously nominated. Conversely, how a couple of years ago, it was more than a couple, but like when Catherine Bigelow did Hurt Locker, which is another movie that was not advertised as, you know, female directed or whatever until the credits roll, and you're like, holy shit, because that's one of my, like, it's in my list of like top 10 like war movie type things. But I'm curious if we're going down because of the awareness of this topic now, is that we're going down the route of we're not going to get Hurt Locker-esque stuff because there's going to be now a new focus of I can only produce female voice to be considered a serious female director. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just genuinely curious that if we're not considering how the market works, that we're not working our way into this tight little place, and then we're going to be in trouble in like 3 years.
No, I don't think we're working our way into any sort of anything, because it's not like those categories or the box office or even developments are like flooded with female driven or female created either capacity. So I think like, I think a female voice, right, is just, I think I'm glad you sort of said this, because I'm realizing that we're differentiating between something like Little Women, which is like really perceived as a female voice because it's more of a female-driven story, versus The Hurt Locker, which was still a female voice, right? Like it was still a female director, so it's like that's a female perspective within the confines of what you're saying is, I think, typically a more male genre. Yeah. But no, I mean, I don't think that. From my perspective, there's like, that feels like 3 steps ahead. And I completely understand what you're asking, but like, I'm quick to respond that seems like 3 steps ahead. Okay. A problem that seems like a problem in an environment that's like only when this problem is solved, and a kind of like hypothetical one at that. I think that to your point a little bit, I think that there often is, and I think that this is much worse for people of color, especially women of color, where it's like, if you're going to be pitching something, it has to be really representative. Okay, that's what I was like that experience. Yeah. So like, and I'm not going to speak on this like too fully, but I see that a lot, like with women of color creators, where it's like they're most taken seriously if they're pitching a sort of like very serious reflection of their experiences, versus like, I'm just a writer that creates this kind of story that might be like separate from me.
Because we just got there. Like we just got there with Get Out, where we had a black male director who wrote and directed something that was, from the black perspective, but was like massively widely appealing and just a killer story. Just objectively great film. Like, we're way far off. Once we get to the point where we're worried about women and minorities pigeonholing themselves, then that's a great problem to have. Then suddenly we're in a good place if that's our biggest concern. Right now, it's just having more. But the question is, why aren't more female directors nominated? Because there aren't any, because the opportunities aren't there yet. That just hasn't been created in our system, in our environment yet.
I think it's more of an opportunity problem than a resource problem.
Right. I think I understand. I'm going to kind of go backwards a little bit, because I think I understand now what you're saying. And I was thinking, when you asked your question, I was thinking so much in like the category of like awards and that kind of like top tier, like very well known. And I think I do amend what I said a little bit to really acknowledge what you were saying, like at an entry level point, like people who are trying to like create things before they have a name, before things are made, like from the development standpoint. I think that that's really true. I think that there is a pressure to sort of be like, bring in your voice, aka your voice is what I see. Like your voice is a reflection of like the gender I'm seeing, the color I'm seeing, like the background I'm seeing. I think that that's definitely still a problem. I apologize. I was thinking more sort of like, once things are made from an audience perspective, only being that way. And like, I was thinking very much Oscars. So I think that both of what you're saying is true, kind of depending on what sort of like route of the ladder you're seeing. But I do think that if we're at a point where like, women are being nominated, like I do think that seems like from an awards show perspective, that does seem like a problem for the later time. But I absolutely think that there can be like a hold up on sort of like judging a creator for like what their story is. That's really an outward projection.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know, and it's funny to think about I remember an interview, and I don't remember who it was with. I don't know if it was with Melissa McCarthy or who it was with, but it was right around time Bridesmaids came out, and the conversation was about, can women be funny? We were having that conversation like what, 8 years ago? Like, really? Like, so, you know, we've come a long way in 8 years, hopefully, to like but I just can't. You just don't.
But 8 years ago was not long ago at all.
You don't think about how how just completely backwards we are as humans. I've been like watching a lot of documentary. Like has become like, it always was kind of my passion, but I never watched as many because I for some reason was like, no, I'm going to direct studio movies. I need to watch more movies. But lately I've just gone. I love documentary. I love making it. I want to do more. So I've been watching it. But the stuff that I've been watching lately has been a lot of like true crime-ish type stuff, where a lot of it's the failing of the system. And here's this guy who got exonerated after being in jail for 30 years or whatever, that kind of stuff. And it is so unreal how completely racist the system is even now. And so just thinking about like they're not even trying. Like, guy A gets killed. We think it might kind of possibly in a vague way be black guy A. Let's just give him the chair. Like, it's just legit like that, and still is, and it's just unreal. So I'm not demoralized by it by any stretch. I'm actually like encouraged by the fact that there are so many good people in the world doing so much good to try to reverse these things and change it. And I want to see more of that in our industry. That was a big thing for me when we were making Platonic, which has been a long time ago. But it was just like, that was the first time I saw myself. I wrote this thing, and then I was like, God, you're a disgusting boy. Like, you just write gross boy stuff. Because it was like there was a lot of girls in the show, and Selena directed some episodes, and it was just like, I was like, oh, this is the first time that like my own sort of like gross boyness was thrown in my face, and that everybody was kind of So I did like make a conscious effort to include diversity, women and gay men, and just doing everything I could to create diversity. And not make it feel forced, but also maybe I was just assuaging my own, like trying to like make my gross DNA feel better. Too.
Oh my God, I had no idea what I was doing.
Well, you did great. What you did was great.
Good times. Good times. That's why everyone should go watch it. That was 2013.
Yeah.
14?
Yeah. 7 years ago. Yikes.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, it's so that paradox exactly of what you were saying, where it's like I just oscillate between feeling so inspired by like what I see and like these big and small.
Look at that! That's a great picture. Good shirts too. Seeing
these like big and small breakthroughs.
Yeah.
In the industry and beyond that, and then just feeling so totally like this will just never happen in my lifetime. And you just kind of have to like feed off both of those in whatever way pushes you forward. And I just think that like the sooner that everyone can realize, like I was constantly thinking like, yeah, what are the judgments I still have? Like what are the things, like once I gave myself permission to be like, you know what, you have a lot of expectations about people that aren't right, that you like learned growing up, that you need, like once I just gave myself permission to be like, where are you like being like Selena, where are you being misogynist, like where are you being racist, where are you being classist, like once I gave myself permission to sort of just like I think like if you're like I'm not any of those things, like you're just blocking off like that route for, and I'm not saying you have to go like shout it from the rooftop, but if you're not even letting yourself think those things in the privacy of your own brain, right. Maybe with a friend or a partner, but if you're blocking that off of like, I don't have those like views and those things from growing up in, however you grow up, and everyone has their own background, then I think like you're really doing yourself a disservice. And I think that like giving myself that permission to like realize my shortcomings as a writer, as a director, as a creative, as a person has been really liberating, and it really comes back, I think, in the work that I try and do, because I'm no longer afraid to explore those things. It doesn't feel like some taboo thing. I'm like, okay, it's like admitting it is like the first step, and then you can really kind of like dive in and start to move past and reflect it in art with humor or drama or whatever it is. And so I think that it's simultaneous.
We were on a really good point, a really good roll
filling
there.
up the knowledge.
And all right, when she comes back, we'll tag back on that. But that was one of the things too, is I'm always checking myself on this show now, because we have like 1.5 million listeners. So I want to make sure that I'm always saying the right thing. But not the right thing. I want to offer my own perspective. I want to offer my own opinion. But I'm always checking myself. And I think that in a way, you have to be 50-50. You have to be like okay with like messing up and be kind to yourself. But on the other hand, try to do the best you can. I guess that's where you gotta live.
But that's the thing. Part of it too is like, 'cause I know we've said it a couple of times, and I've said it a couple of times tonight too. It's like, I know the things that I will say, or the way that I think about certain things, are jaded to a certain spectrum, and that's I don't want to say it's fine, but it would be.
It's just reality.
Yeah, it would be inhuman to assume.
That's 100% of humans live in a bubble.
It would be insane to assume that everything I say is non-offensive to every credo out there. But I think the difference is the awareness of it, of saying, I'm not trying to create or make controversial statements, but I think that if you don't test the edges of conversation, then you're just kind of all agreeing to the same stuff. And we call it smelling your own farts. Like you're
you can't live in an echo chamber. You
right.
can't, because in any perspective, that's not going to fly. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. If you just live in an echo chamber and never test the limits of conversation, then you're never going to get anywhere. Selena, I think you were on a really
did I get cut off in my
you did
speech?
Right.
I mean,
they played the music. They dropped the mic.
I'm a woman.
We were just like, she's talking too much women talk, and just clicked her.
I got internet. Yeah.
So I guess the real question, though, that I really want to get to is, when is Aaron Sorkin going to get the respect he deserves?
That's the conclusion we need. Yeah. I did remember the female creator that I couldn't remember before, which is probably not someone you're going to recognize, which is why I couldn't summon it again when I was forgetting. But all this Little Women talk has also been reminding me. I've been really enjoying Dickinson on Apple's TV, which I know is a less common platform for people.
For now.
But created by this woman, Alina Smith, and it's similar. It's like the same time period piece, like Little Women, but it's this super fun with Haley Steinfeld, like super fun kind of modern twist on these stories with really modern dialogue and music, and I love it because she kind of took this very kind of like what you would think of as being a preconceived period piece, and really, really, really just punched it into the present, and really seamless. Like, it's not like a Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet situation where it's like we're just placing one element on top of another. It's very, very well themed together. So like they say like, "What's up?" and you don't even notice it because it feels so organic within the scene, even though it's like 18, whatever. So just to keep with the theme of talking about one thing and then 30 minutes later coming back to it.
Swinging back around. But that was kind of one of the things that I was not disappointed, was not expecting from. Okay, I'm going to get my words right. I thought I was seeing in Little Women, and then it didn't execute, which was this slightly. She had these moments where it was like almost Wes Anderson moment, and then not really. It was almost a modern callback, and then it wasn't really. It never seemed to. It was like I wanted it to either go full on Marie Antoinette and just be like punk rock but everything else was period, or go full on like British epic, and so it just seemed like it kind of hung out in the middle, and that was why I was like, yeah, there's got to be a bunch of studio interference or something going on here, because it just didn't hit. It was trying to toe the line between marketable and art house film, and you can see when something was made by committee, and when it was like 100% that director's vision. At least that was my perspective. I might be completely wrong, and I am okay with being wrong. I like it.
I do think I appreciated with Little Women that I felt like they were actual people. I think with this has less to do with gender and just more with like the way that we perceive like any sort of period piece, or even like reading books or like Shakespeare, like whatever. Like we think of these sort of like upright, very kind of cardboardy characters, and yes, they fall in love, and yes, they get in fights, and yes, they have disputes with their parents and all these things, but we don't think of them as having the same sort of like flesh and personality that a modern day character does. So I did appreciate with Little Women that it felt like these were like kids or like young adults who, like, yes, it's over 100 years ago, but they still have that kind of three-dimensional element that I think could sometimes be not lost, but I think a lot of times characters from period pieces like that can be sort of just like stuffed into this photograph of how we perceive them from that time. So I totally understand what you're saying, but I did sort of like appreciate that I like pushed in that direction without making it. For me, like I interpreted what you were saying as like giving them more three-dimension and like relatability of a modern character without it being stylistically modern.
Right.
But I can see how like you might have, because we're more used to seeing either like a directorial stylistic push one way or the other, feeling like I'm in this in-between space. But
when I think that I should say that, I mean, Laura Dern is just at this point in her career like a national treasure. Like, I don't even know who is doing better work than her right now in that. Like, especially her career trajectory is just like. But in that movie, she was so amazing and so relatable, and just everything about her was just radiant. Like, I just loved her, and of course Meryl Streep was great too. But that was like the big, the cherry on top was her stuff there. But that was it. That was the characters the actors, the way that they're portraying their character were very real and very, very thoughtful, and they weren't that stiff, cardboardy thing we're used to seeing from period pieces like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But did you see Parasite?
Oh yeah.
Just see, I'm the one who hasn't watched it yet. I know I didn't get around to it.
It's really just a masterpiece.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
You have no excuses.
I know, I don't have excuses. My only excuse is that I just kept on watching other things. So I've been watching other things. But Eric, you just watched it, right?
Yes, I did. Yep. And yeah, I've seen a couple of his. I watched Okja and the train one. Budweiser, Silver Bullet. Yeah.
The Silver Bullet.
And
did he direct Snowpiercer?
Mm-hmm. Snowpiercer, yeah.
Not the
TV.
Yeah.
You're talking about with Chris Evans and Tilda Swinton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He directed that?
Huh.
Yeah.
No way. I thought that there was a previous version.
Of what we were talking
right? Absolutely.
In real time, that's the perception of him being like an Asian director, because Parasite was like so of his background, but he did all this other stuff before.
Yeah.
Well, is Ocha the one about the fat like hippo dog that they're trying to make hot dogs out of?
It's the CGI pig thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of probably should have been animated, frankly. It's live action. And
it's like a Miyazaki kind of thing. So, so I'll jump tangent for a second of Snowpiercer. I knew that was a graphic novel. So for me, seeing Snowpiercer was not about seeing who constructed the film. My seeing that was seeing how closely it related to the graphic novel
source. Yeah. Okay.
But no, that's awesome.
I thought it was
that movie's dope too. Yeah.
Well, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I didn't realize that. See all these gosh darn preconceived notions we have in life. I thought it was Michael Bay.
I didn't assume it was. You know what? I'm not gonna lie. In my head, since I didn't know who directed it, I probably just assumed it was a white guy.
Yeah.
Just some unknown white dude
Yeah.
Because it has such a weird collection of famous people in it. Actually, you know who I did? No, I lied. I thought for the longest time, oh man, this is going to sound so bad. I thought that the guy in the end, who's the engineer who stops the train, I thought he directed it. And that could have just been
Ed Harris?
No. The Asian guy that's like the drug addict that they pull out to stop the train to open the door.
Oh,
he's got the daughter.
The guy with the cigarette.
It's been a bit, but that could have been me getting bad information. Because I thought somebody had told me that he had directed the film and was giving himself like a self cameo.
Wrong.
And we lost Selena again.
# wrong. Yeah, we sure did.
Because I thought it's like Stephen Kuhn or Stephen Kuhn who.
Bong.
No, not the actual director, but the guy who plays that part.
The actor, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, let me look at. I'll throw it up on the old IMDb.com now.
I do now, and I wanted to watch it way back when it came out. Was Host? I think that was his first one.
Yeah, that was one of his first
in America.
Yep, that was one of his first. Ones that really hit. Was that Selena? We couldn't tell if you froze up or if you just were really
disgusted
not into
by
what
it.
Nick was saying. And I was
that was so exciting because I also thought everybody else was just dead silent. And I was like,
Probably.
Is it my turn?
There's very rarely an awkward silence on this show.
Yeah, I was glad.
So what else? What else are you watching right now that you are loving that we should check out?
So we're waiting for the new season of Killing Eve to come on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
So it's live on TV.
Yeah, but we're like a Roku setup.
Everyone's OTT in LA. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
But I know
season 3 just started.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think there's like a delay, but we're looking forward to that. But I just got Apple TV, as I mentioned before, so I've been doing a lot on there. Been really enjoying Dickinson. I really enjoyed Little America, which is Alan Yang. Well, he's not writing it; he's EPing it, but it's an anthology, which I love anthologies. Apparently, no one wants to buy them. I'm trying to sell one, which is not going well.
Really?
I'm watching them, and I really it's like about immigrant stories, but it's just such a good example where it's like, sure, that's the log line, but you watch it and you're like, okay, these are just stories. Like, yes, they are about immigrants, but each one is just a completely different landscape. And that show is so up my alley. I think I have one left. So a lot of Apple stuff. I was kind of looking at the shows that I personally would connect to more at first, and now I kind of want to branch out into the stuff that's outside of my genre. So I want to look at Servant, which is M. Night Shyamalan, and this show C. So I'm on the Apple TV train right now, making the most of my $5 a month.
Yeah. Have you tried For All Mankind yet?
No.
Because Brian Bailey is an
yeah.
editor on that show. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. I really like it. Feels like old school Netflix, which there's just like, it's such a curated platform. There's only so many shows, and I love being able to go on and scroll through like a one page. It's there's a decent amount of shows on the platform right now, but I really appreciate like seeing like, okay, there's not 70 million originals along with like 70 million. I mean, remember back in the day where it was like you only had, like when a new Netflix show came out, you heard about it because it was like such a big deal. And there used to be, I still really like that about Amazon is they just have a little bit more of like a curated development slate. Well, not development, I don't know about development, but release slate rather.
In a way, it would be nice to go back to that, to like if there was like 2 Netflixes where it could just be just like the originals and you can just do that. And then, or you want to watch all the other movies because it does get a bit much after a while, and you just go that paralysis by analysis trying to figure out what to watch.
Yeah,
it's just.
So I just love that of having this platform where it's like, okay, here's like a show I haven't watched, which I'm obviously not there yet, but I like where it's like I have 10 shows, and I'm gonna pick one of these shows because I just got this platform. So, I've been liking that. What was the show I was really obsessed with in the fall before I got this? I love Maisel. Does anyone watch that here?
Oh yeah, I watched the first season. Yeah, the first season was great. I mean, she's fantastic, but her relationship with Tony Shalhoub in the show is so
my god, he is talk about a national treasure. He is so funny.
Amazing in that show. It's so good.
Yes, he really is just, he's so delightful. And Jane Lynch, I don't know if you got to that part in the first season, but yeah, that's a show that I'm trying to think of shows that I get really excited for when I hear there's a new season.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, Insecure just started. I haven't seen the season premiere yet, but I love that show. I'm very excited to see that. Insecure.
Oh, Insecure.
Oh,
yeah.
HBO.
Yeah, I haven't gone there yet, but everybody I've talked to just loves it.
Yeah, I think that's a great show. Yeah. Like, I shows where I'm just purely delighted to watch it, and I'm just so excited for it to come out. I just feel like those really they're cream that rises to the top. Of course, I'm saying the obvious things, but
did you watch Glow?
I never watched Glow, and not for any good reason. I have no good reason. It's not that I'm not interested in it. It's not that I have it's just one of those things where somehow it fell through the cracks and I haven't gone back and watched it.
Yeah.
And I just have no good reason to give you.
Did you guys like it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
I think the first season was really strong. I think the second season meandered like crazy and then kind of got to the end. Did it have 3 or just 2 seasons so far? I've watched all of it, but I can't remember.
Yeah, well, because the season 1 ends with them getting canned, right? And I thought season 2 ended with them going to Vegas, or is it?
Yeah, so I think it's just been 2 seasons. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Or do they have a Vegas season?
There's a season in Vegas.
Season?
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. There's a third.
The problem with binging.
It just all glow. It all glows together.
It all glows together.
So
yeah, it's tough because it's like you can definitely tell where they had, unfortunately, like they had a really good idea, and then they produced this amazing thing, and then it became successful, and they're like, oh shit. So then
second season.
So then they do a second season, and people are like, well, I'm in already, so I'm going to watch the second season. Especially the way Netflix releases things, you can just binge it. So it's like, wait. Power weekend, and then done, and then everyone's like next. So I think that they're getting stuck with having to produce all of that stuff, and then but not giving it an actual look of whether they should produce it or not.
Right.
Like I think there's a lot of summer shows. Like one of my favorite summer shows, and this is a deep callback. There's a show with Lake Bell. They came out. Oh my God, over 10 years ago. But it came out the same time as a show called Invasion. But the whole premise of the show was that they had these alien super lizards
Battlestar
came in and it flooded the earth, and they were now the new top predator, but they weren't necessarily killing humans. So she was like a ocean botanist or something, but it was just like they did one season and they ended it and they're like, we're done now. Like, that's it. I don't want to, this could be successful or not. Sorry. One season, we told the story. If we try to make a second season, oh God, it's going to fall apart so fast.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that but what's interesting is that shows are still done sort of in that old school way, even on OTT, where Ozark was a good example where first season happens and it was very much like, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're not sure if people are going to like it, and we're just going to just do it. And suddenly people were like, we need more Bateman. And so they just did it. And it just blew up. But it's interesting that still is a thing, even though studios now are so much more, they just basically control all the content because they have their own channel. So
right. That's going to fall apart here pretty soon.
What do you mean?
We're going to go back to cable. In 10 years. It won't be called cable, but it'll be cable.
Yeah, I can't see
really like that.
It being sustainable where you have essentially just these top-up platforms. Like I saw,
oh, you mean that no, we're already on our way. I mean, OTT they're doing pre-roll ads now, so and mid-roll commercials and stuff. So we're not far off from it being TV again. You know what I mean? Because you just have to, because at $5.99 a month, you can't. Once you have everyone on Earth who has a bank account on your thing, that hits the limit. And when you're making movies or TV shows at $2 million an episode, it starts to suck up the.
100%. That's why I said I can't see it being sustainable. I saw a trailer today for a movie that has Anna Kendrick in it called Dummy, that is on Quibi, which I know is a lot of words that may or may not ring
Quibi
true to anyone. Those are
it's
all in English.
I'm not taking it seriously today. But that's just me.
Yeah, but I remember the first time I heard about Quibi was a really bad Super Bowl commercial, and now apparently they have enough starter cap. Have a movie with Anna Kendrick
it was started. No, it was started by some major Hollywood players.
Was it really?
Yeah, I gotta look it up. It's gonna be like Brian Grazer or something. Yeah, no, it's legit.
And Hubert, that's where they got most.
I would assume it's legit. I mean, I know that like
great.
I try to sometimes I'll step away from the fan sense of it and look at the business sense of it. But like, if you can get a super A-list for
Katzenberg found it.
Okay. Yeah, so you get an A-lister and you throw them a check for like, we'll give you $3.1 million to be in this little thing, and it's going to get a little, or they'll give them stuff on the back, and they'll be like, look, we'll pay you $2, and then we'll give you a percentage of.
I think it's more like we're going to shoot for 3 days. Here's $100,000. That's probably more like what it.
You think that's what it
really is? Yeah, and maybe some stock in the
minutes. You can. It's like being a guest on an episode. It's like the commitment for an actor is so small, relative. For what is a like headline credit, so it's kind of a good deal for all.
Yeah, and I don't know what I haven't dived into it. It doesn't sound like something I want to watch, but I mean, I don't need my stuff in small bites. I like to sit down and commit to something, commit to a long story, but it really appeals to the TikTok generation.
I know that's the part that I'm scared about is that everything is becoming so bite-sized and small and like let me have 15 minutes of your time. That's all I need. But then like 15 minutes becomes 15 minutes becomes 15 minutes becomes 15 minutes, and the next thing it's 3 a.m. and you're practicing a TikTok dance in the dark.
I think about it. Yeah, well, yeah.
Somebody's guilty.
But I think about that a lot with my own like YouTube videos too, where I'm thinking about the time period. Like, does a person want to commit to a video that has a 1 in front of it? Anything over 10 minutes is just a different ballgame.
Yeah, right.
And
I think it's
so you just do that a lot.
I think with your videos where you're doing partial instruction, insanely entertaining. Oh my god, just riveted. 5 out of 5.
Yes.
But they're educational. Like you're teaching or telling something. I think that's fine. But yeah, if you're gonna put together like a 10-minute video of like, how would you guys like to watch me watch a T-shirt? I'm out. Like I'm gone.
Wash a T-shirt?
Like
I'd watch you do that
for 10 minutes.
Sometimes it takes a while.
I feel like now's the right time to say that literally 3 days ago I watched a 45-minute YouTube video on the history of Donkey Kong. 45.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
There you go. You committed to it. So.
And I watched it. I was like, oh, there's only 5 minutes left. Very
Did you seen King of Kong?
Yes.
Have I seen what?
King of Kong.
No.
Oh, that's a documentary.
Look that one up. The one to watch.
It was
It's
about 10. What's you saying? Like 15 years old, maybe at this point.
Probably 15.
But, Oh yeah, it's got to be older than
17
about 15
years.
Because it's about people who are really into vintage video games, but specifically a guy who's trying to break the Donkey Kong world record for points.
Oh.
Yeah, so look it up. King of Kong.
Yeah. All right.
It's
worth it because it's so good
amazing.
Because of it just highlights how in every, and I've said this for years, how in every culture of something that people are interested in, there is always a very highly dedicated subculture.
Oh,
that like you think like, why am I going to watch a Donkey Kong movie that doesn't make any sense? And then 5 minutes in, when he's got like a whiteboard marker and he's drawing on the glass of his arcade box, you're like, holy shit, this is too much. This is too far.
Guys, we have our next Best Picture winner. Just 15 years.
It was nominated. I think it was actually nominated for.
Oh, really?
Probably was.
Okay. Well, I clearly don't know what I'm talking about then.
Did you go to Fun Spot in
Oh,
Laconia?
it was a documentary. I'm still thinking like a YouTube, like someone put like a user put together. Okay.
No, it's a documentary, but part of it takes place in Laconia. Did you ever go to Fun Spot in New Hampshire, in Laconia?
Oh my gosh, maybe. Like
it's like a big street level. There's classic arcade games.
Yeah.
I love that it was called Fun Spot. I want to know, either a guy just thought of that off the top of his head, or he had a list of great names and he chose it out of that, or he's like starting a business. Should I call it? Just call it like Awesome Place? No, that's too weird.
No, it's
too long.
Too long.
Yeah. Cool Zone.
It's not a refrigerator.
Well, what are two things that it is? Well,
Cool Zone. We should think of refrigeration.
It's fun, and it's kind of a cool spot. What should we? Fun Spot.
That's it. That's a hip word, right? That's what all the kids are using these days. The spot.
Fun Spot.
What's a 6-year-old gonna get excited
It's
about?
definitely worth checking out, though. It's an amazing documentary. But so yeah, well, Selena, I see you shifted your perspective here. You got the bar on the other side of you now.
My computer died. Like, I guess maybe it was trying to tell me that it was dying, and I was so engrossed in this that I paid no attention. And so that actually was not the internet going out. It was just my computer full and dying. So I plugged into my desk over here.
Love it.
So glad you guys all know that now.
Yeah.
We're with the hard-hitting explanation.
Well, I think that we should do this again sometime. This is like really fun, and your perspective is incredibly cool. It's fun to have knowledgeable. What's that? We're just gonna get you a microphone. Yeah, that's for sure.
Get you a mic. Get you a little mini setup.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I would agree too. This has been super good because we all have very specific stuff. We were talking about this. I think one of the times, many times, you cut out of how we were kind of like in our own little space sometimes, but it's important to work around the boundaries of conversation and perspective, so that you're not just like agreeing with yourself through two other people. So it's awesome. This is really good. And I still struggle with what is best director, just because it's such a behind the scenes activity for me. I'm still struggling with it.
Can a best director get away with a weaker script that a best movie just can't? Where a best can put their stamp on something that maybe just doesn't have that pedigree to be a best picture.
Possible.
I mean, that's happened. We could probably look it up. There's probably been people that were like best director alone, like that, and that's all that it was nominated for was director, but it didn't get cinematography, best picture, no actor nominations, like just a standalone. I'm sure we could look it up. Just a sole best director. But to me, that's where I think that's where maybe the source of my question of is it more of, I mean, it's definitely a popularity contest, but is it more of a brand recognition type thing that like, how are you the best director, but that is the only nomination for this film?
Well, honestly,
is it also your voice, where it's like, just to put a good, competent movie together is one thing, and that's kind of a feat unto itself. But to do that, plus have someone be able to go, that's your voice, and that stands out like a sore thumb in a great way, kudos. I think that's a whole different level and a whole different thing.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of...
Couldn't even end strong.
We're almost there. But, I think that we should just find out. I'm just going to have to ask around and see if I can find someone who has an inside knowledge of how is best director really. I'm sure Selena, I'm sure one of us knows somebody who knows how it's all done,
There's got to be like books written on this too. I mean, the Academy is, like I was saying, it's just like its own. That and other work. So it's just like its own thing. So I'm sure, and it has plenty of critics and praisers, so critics and admirers. So I'm sure that there's plenty written on this topic if we dig into it. Which
if we only had time. We're also busy.
Right. So much going on.
I know.
But thank you for coming on the show. It was so much fun to have you on. Let's do it again.
Yes, I had so much fun. This was great. Thank you guys.
Please don't think less of us.
I think more of the whole day after this. My week has improved. No, this was great. Thank you guys for listening, for inviting me. I'm just so humbled and honored, excited.
See what a great actress she is.
To be leaving, guys. I'm humbled to be leaving.
I'm humbled to be shutting off this Skype call.
Thank you so much for telling me this is over. Thank you very much.
That's probably where I'll fade out. That's where I'll fade in the music, probably.
Perfect.
Yeah.